everyone. Welcome to a special edition of Hope Live. I'm Adriana Mallozzi, community advocate at House of Possibilities. This episode is in recognition of the 32nd anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA. We'll be covering a broad range of topics, including disability rights, how advocacy has changed since the passing of the ADA, the role of technology, and advocacy for healthcare equity. The ADA, signed into law on July 26, 1990, is a civil rights law prohibiting discrimination based on disability in all areas of public life, including employment, education, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. Joining me today is Heather Watkins, a Boston-based disability rights advocate, an author, a blogger, a mother, and a graduate of Emerson College with a bachelor's in communications. Please welcome Heather Watkins.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Adriana. Glad to
Hi,
be
Heather.
here.
Yes, thank you for joining us. So, Heather,
My pleasure.
for those of you who don't know you, why don't you give us a little bit of a background on how you got into advocacy and how you got into what you do today?
Oh, sure. I think I got involved because of frustrations, not having the kind of access that I felt like I needed, and then just not seeing it for myself, but for those in my community. So, I was born with a form of muscular dystrophy. I didn't always use mobility aids like I do now. I started using them in my 30s. I'm almost 50. I use a manual wheelchair on occasion and a cane. And I also use durable medical equipment, such as a ventilator, to assist my breathing when sleeping at night due to compromised respiratory muscles. So it was through that evolution and that journey that, I started to see my life change and the trajectory of my life change. I had to slow down my work. I'm working so much. And at the same time, I had a small child. And so I started thinking, what do I need to do to have more quality of life? Even though I was so, afraid at that time because I didn't know what my life would look like in terms of decreasing my work hours and thinking about a whole new plan for myself. It's easy to do it when, it's just you that you have to think about. But when you're a parent, you got to think about your child and, your economics and your household management and, paying bills and stuff. So it really took a lot of self-inventory, thinking about, what are you passionate about? How are you going to create this kind of plan and blueprint for your daughter to kind of, look up at you and, with those little impressionable eyes that children have, absorbing everything around them and, being the beneficiary or of all of your life's choices. So those are all of the questions and thoughts that I had that was swirling around, thinking about my next steps. And so I kept getting the thought and the next purpose in life was to pursue disability advocacy. So I'm driving around town and, seeing things like, stairs that are attached to local businesses. And then I started seeing, narrow doorways. And I was thinking, there has to be better access to these local businesses, and I started to, kind of think about that more. And I wondered why more people weren't doing something about that. Then I got a hit, a light bulb moment that said, well, why don't you do something about it? You know what I mean? And so that's when, I started to think of in more of a grander way and just kind of researching things online and also just watching the news broadcast that night and seeing somebody in my area in Rosendale, and located here in Boston. And they were affiliated with one of the independent living centers here, Boston Center for Independent Living. And her name was Liz Casey, and they were doing a feature of her, doing some surveying and advocacy in Rosendale. And so I said to myself, oh, I got to connect with her because she's, in my section of Boston, and I got to see what, how she goes about doing what she's doing. I got to partner up with her. And so I went to bed that night, got up the next morning, and then I called up Boston Center for Independent Living and, told them I saw Liz Casey. Is there any way I could get connected with her? They connected me with her, and lo and behold, the next day I talked with her and she agreed to meet at a local, coffee shop. And so we started talking, and then, make a long story short, it was just a great partnership. And she kind of brought me into the fold and started telling me, about connecting with others at BCIL. From there, it just was like a snowball effect happening. Got connected with the Boston Commission for Persons with Disabilities Advisory Board, and served on that advisory board under both Mayor Menino and Mayor Walsh for 7 years. So it was a great learning experience, and where I was able to connect with so many like-minded others working in collaborative effort towards beneficial change. And that was really important to me because, I didn't have that support network composed of other disabled persons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. And I actually know Liz Casey as well. And
yes, she's wonderful.
She's great. Yes,
yes.
She is. She is.
Yes.
So let's get back to why we're here. We just celebrated the 32nd anniversary of the signing of the ADA. And July is Disability Pride Month, and although the ADA is only specific to the U.S., right? Disability Pride Month, the month of July, is now recognized globally. So, what does Disability Pride mean to you, and why do you think it's important we celebrate it and highlight it?
I think it's important because, it's not only a demographic, it's an identity marker. It has culture, it has history, it has political movement and constituency. And, we acquire disabilities in one of four ways, through birth, accident, illness, or it be age related. And I think the pride is just really more of a comprehensive view and assessment rather than what we get across the media landscape, right? Pity and pedestal, sadness and supercrip. So our pride is really about, looking at our lives and our journeys in a more 360-degree kind of way than sort of these binaries and these polarities, right? And so when we talk about that, especially from intersectional points of view, I have pride in being a Black disabled woman, and I'm pretty definitive and declarative about that, because of my own journey and really connecting with so many others in the active community who are, Black, Indigenous, and other persons of color, because I feel like that kind of a diverse advocacy circle is really where I got to see myself mirrored, because I didn't see that in, magazines and all other forms of media. And that does have an effect on your self-awareness. It has an effect on your self-awareness and your, how you see yourself. You have to see yourself in those kinds of lights, and it impacts your self-advocacy skills as well. And so that all played out into how I saw disability in a larger, grander scale, the worldview.
Yeah.
And we each internalize our disabilities in different ways, but it is impacted by one another because we share stories We swap tips and resources and even frustrations, and that's important. So that's when disability pride means just the lifting of that cap, right? I
Yeah.
often think, I just want to add really quickly too, I often think that, how would my disability have been impacted much earlier? Like, say, in grade school, if we learned
Mm-hmm.
about people with disabilities and how their disability impacted their life and the way they governed their life, the way their life's directions took off, right?
Yeah.
Instead of it being downplayed or erased, like
Yeah.
Harriet Tubman, like Sojourner Truth, like
Yeah.
Fannie Lou Hamer, like
Mm-hmm.
Brad Lomax, just to name a few whose
Mm-hmm.
disabilities impacted them, the way they live their lives. So, and these are newly disabled persons as well, who may not get a complete and accurate depiction of what it means to have a disability or live with disabilities, you know? So, yeah, those are just some of the
Exactly.
thoughts I have around disability pride.
Yeah. And in your opinion, how has advocacy changed in the 30 plus years since the ADA was signed? Like, have you seen that evolution?
Well, when it was signed, I was 17 years old and a rising senior. So, it was signed that summer. And
Yeah.
I had no idea about the ADA, nor its impact and its significance. I don't think
Same
I
here.
started, yeah, I didn't start to hear about it probably until I got into college, maybe like
Mm-hmm.
my junior or senior year, because
Mm-hmm.
that's when my classes were put on lower floors. Because prior to
Mm-hmm.
that, I had to like try to navigate this course, through buildings that didn't have railings, that didn't have elevators. Some elevators were on the second floor, but you had to go upstairs to get to the elevator. So it was this maze. Yeah, you had to go to get through to get educated. And so yeah, it was really, it was just a time. It was an experience, frustrating, but I didn't know collectively like how else to manage what was going on. You know, so yeah, it's from that point on, and then starting to get involved in advocacy circles not until 2005. And then really mobilizing online and in person,
Mm-hmm.
where technology connects so many of us globally as well, locally, nationally and globally. Because I
Definitely.
also, it's so important to develop a global disability lens perspective as well, to see what everybody else is doing, in their different cultures and countries and different societies, and how they see disabilities. So many people still see disabilities across the globe as sometimes karma or family
Mm-hmm.
curse.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a chance to see how people internalize disabilities, and how they treat people with disabilities, whether they are apparent, non-apparent, or include chronic illness.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about the numbers, right? Here in this country, nearly 62 million, 1 out of 4 people.
Yep.
That's a pretty significant demographic, right? That needs a marketing plan. You know,
Exactly.
so yeah, and nearly 1 billion globally. That's a lot, and counting because of long COVID.
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely. And it got me thinking when you were talking about karma and different cultures. I had a PCA. So for those who don't know what PCAs are, it stands for personal care attendant. Um, and it's someone that comes and helps me in my daily life. I have multiple people that do that, and at this time, this was several years ago. Um, she was from one of the Caribbean islands, and she said to me that my parents must have done something wrong,
Oh
um,
no.
and that is what um, I was born the way I was. And I was like, well, that's not really appropriate to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, different cultures have
Yeah.
different views of disability, and
Yeah.
going
And
back
that's yeah,
to
and that's not
why,
indicative of all Caribbean
right,
cultures, of course,
of
because
course,
I've had several people from, different cultures come and work as PCAs, and they did not,
yeah, same,
espouse such beliefs. But,
yeah,
it's important to note that many people here in the United
yes,
States have some backwards beliefs
yeah, and
about
I think,
disabilities.
yeah, and that goes back to why it's so important, right? Why we celebrated Pride Month,
Yeah,
Disability Pride in July is just to show and highlight that we have lives.
yeah,
We are living our lives just like everyone else, and doing what
absolutely.
we want to do and love to do. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah. As well as the joy part of it too, right? And
yeah,
art. There's a lot of art that comes out of the disability community that
yes,
I don't think people, really recognize. I mean,
hmm,
and then not to, we also there are so many of us who are parents. People don't think of us in more of a being multi hyphenates, right?
yeah,
And I often like to characterize myself as being in need of care, a caregiver, and a
hmm,
community builder all at
hmm,
once. And if you redact any part of that bio, then you reduce my community visibility and contribution.
yeah,
So, and that's true of many, people I know, especially women of color who live in that continuum. So many of us are living in interdependent communities and in multi-generational households where we
hmm,
we are relying on the help of one another to really have the success and get our needs met, you know
yes,
um helping one another out. So yeah, yeah, it's just an important notation that might not
yeah,
always be highlighted, you know
yeah, yeah. And speaking of you being a mother, um, typically, especially women with disabilities,
yeah,
um, when it comes to healthcare, right?
yeah,
Healthcare access equals healthcare access. Um, Equity, it's still an issue to this day. We have the
oh
ADA that's
yeah.
32 years old. Um, and when you had your child, how long ago was that?
Oh, she's 28 now.
So
So
twenty
it's
years ago.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a minute. Time
And
flies.
so how was that? I would love to hear your story about, your experience as
Sure.
a pregnant disabled woman going to your doctor and saying, hey, or I don't know, if you discussed prior to getting pregnant, but I know oftentimes doctors will say to uh women with disabilities, um they expect you not to want to
Right,
have children, not to want to procreate, not to
right.
become a mother. And I
Yeah,
fortunately did have a doctor who, was very clear and said, hey, if you want this path, we will help you
yeah.
on that journey. But I was one of the very few fortunate people to have a doctor that said that. So how was that journey for you, and how do we continue to advocate for equity in
Sure.
healthcare?
Yeah, it's something that I like to talk about and really share, and being vocal about that. I was in my early 20s. I was in college still when I became pregnant, and I remember taking off that semester before she was going to be born. So she was born in late November on Thanksgiving Day that year, and I knew enough to take that semester and that time off so I could prepare adequately because
Mhm.
I would fatigue easily, just like most women who are pregnant. But if you have a physical disability, obviously it's going to impact you in different ways. So I knew
Mhm.
I needed extra time, care, and, just to kind of really be selfish and just take my time doing things. So yeah, it was, I didn't think about as much. I think it probably due to youth, and not, being super anxious. I was fortunate to have my mother around and my grandmother, who's deceased now, who was a true matriarch in every sense of the word, coming up from Greenwood, Mississippi, and had 10 children. So she was the person that we leaned on when we had all these, questions that would come up with children and newborns and pregnancy, and she would always school us all on it. And so I was fortunate to have that wisdom come through. But yeah, dealing with doctors who don't really know a whole lot about disability, and especially muscular dystrophy, and how, that pregnancy and how that would play out, really left you out in kind of a lurch, right? Just had to go along and try to figure it out. And that's how it was. And, since they don't have that information, don't have that research, it was kind of like I said, just going along to get along, and, and we'll just figure it out when something happens. But yeah, I think a lot of that is just not even, conceptualizing that people with disabilities are, sexually active, would want to have children, are even involved in any kind of beauty, pleasure, or anything. And so that knowledge is either withheld or just is totally not there. And that does a disservice to so many people who need that education and who need more, options, reproductive healthcare options and family planning. And so it's really critical that we, keep raising the, alarm on that and amplifying our voices to include so many people with disabilities. And it's not just a women only issue, obviously. It extends to non-binary folk, trans folk, and we need to be talking about disabled fathers as well. Because a lot of times it's always, when we think of, birthing, we're just talking about mothers only, And so, yeah, that was pretty much my healthcare journey in terms of being pregnant and giving birth to my daughter. I was induced at 39 weeks, and she was delivered by forceps because it was really difficult for me after 26 hours of labor. Yeah, I was happy to be done with that, but I did require a longer hospital stay. And then afterwards, after home care, with my mother, I was helped by my mother and my partner. And I think I took a little bit, longer, kind of getting used to everything. And so, yeah. But otherwise, that's how it kind of played out, because you didn't have a whole lot of information and aftercare that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, how do you think those out there that are watching, our allies, how can we continue to advocate for equity in access to healthcare?
Definitely keep partnering and following up with people in the active disability rights community, using your platforms and amplifying our voices. And just remember that, you're kind of co-conspirators. You're not the central voice, and to really, you're the secondary, you're in a supportive position, and not to, make it all about you and your moment, but really being in that strong, supportive person who really, features people with disabilities across a wide variety, especially, multiply marginalized folks who don't often get the spotlight or the microphone. You know what I mean? So those kind of gaps in care, and noticing, how disability shows up in your world, right? Your work and your worldview. Because a lot of people assume that disability is synonymous with negativity. It is not. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
like to also educate people about the disabilities and the breakdown of the even the word. The dis prefix is not only
Mm-hmm.
not an but has a Latin and a Greek derivative, meaning duo and two. So hence another way of doing and being in the world. Disability
Yeah.
is therefore the duality of being. And so, it's just something that I really want people to kind of take away and understand and widen their lens on. Yeah. Past the prism of limitations lens only.
Yeah. And I like to say disability is not a dirty word because there's so many people who try to avoid
Yes.
using the actual word
Yes.
disability.
Yes. And that's specifically because they think of it being negative when it's way
Mm-hmm.
beyond the,
Right.
the lens of limitations only. It's a
Yeah.
much wider lens. But if you never talk about that and that's never shown or depicted anywhere in any meaningful ways, in storylines and plot lines that are
Mm-hmm.
informed by disabled writers from, in front of and behind the camera in post production, then you won't get those kind of depictions. And people say, well, it's just TV or that's just media, but it has an impact because we're an appearance driven society. And so
Exactly.
what is not seen, is assumed to not exist.
Mm-hmm.
And that impacts our quality of life. Why is it dangerous? Because let's suppose a lawmaker is not informed very well regarding disability and the complexity, the nuance, and the range. That can make its way into the legislature, right? Where we
Mm-hmm.
have policies and laws that gut punch quality of life rather than supporting it. That's the danger.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I agree. Thank you so much, Heather. I really enjoyed our conversation today. The final question that I like to ask all of my guests. You are a role model to so many people. Um, who is, or if you have multiple role models, who are they?
Oh man, so many. I like to say I'm bookended by, great women, my mom and my daughter, because they've shown me two different ways of being and growing and living in the world. And, others like my grandmother, I call her the great matriarch, who lived during the Jim Crow era South, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, and just pulled together all of this wisdom and, who ended up short circuiting at the age of 68. And then there are others like Fannie Lou Hamer, whose grassroots activism, a Black disabled woman, whose political career was from the age of 44 through 59, pretty short, right? But really just worked with youth, worked with so many others regarding civil rights, voting rights advocacy, women's rights. And so I look to them as being people in my personal pantheon of great folks, right? Not only in my heart, but just as laying that foundation and that legacy. Definitely
Mm-hmm.
not lost on me that there were so many forebears in the struggle who
Yeah.
put in that work. Whether
Yes.
it's with civil rights, women's rights, or disability rights. Whether they sat in, stood up, or crawled, right?
Yeah.
uh,
Yes.
as in March of 1990, predating
Yeah.
the Americans with
Yes.
Disabilities Act up those
Yes.
Capitol building steps that so many
Yeah.
activists did, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
not lost on me at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you again, Heather. This has been a great conversation. And
My pleasure.
Heather, why don't you tell people how they can follow your journey and see what you're up to and
Sure.
what you'll do in the future as well?
Absolutely. They can follow me on my website, Slow Walkers See More. And I think it's at the bottom of this screen. And I also have other social media links there. It includes my advocacy, my writing, and areas of focus, and press and publicity hits.
Great. Well, thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to our special edition
Thank you all.
of Hope Live. And We will see you soon. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
On behalf of everyone at House of Possibilities, thank you to today's guest for an engaging conversation and you for tuning into this episode of Hope Live. Hope Live is possible because of the generosity of our community. You can help us continue to provide quality programming for individuals with disabilities by making a donation at houseofpossibilities.org/donate. We look forward to seeing you at our next episode.